Tonight, Brownlow bombshell, an AFL umpire among 4 men arrested over suspicious bets. Also tonight, more wild weather chaos. A train derails in heavy rain as homes are flooded again. Anthony Albanese to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping at the G20 in Bali. And white ball kings, England cements its place at the top of the cricket world. Good evening, Suzie with ABC News. An AFL umpire is one of 4 men arrested over suspicious bets placed on this year's Brownlow medal. The AFL doesn't believe there was any match fixing, but 3 of the men are facing serious charges. Tom Maddox joins me now from AFL House. Tom, what can you tell us about this investigation?
Well, Suzie, these arrests stem from an investigation by a team of special detectives charged with looking into sports corruption. And it's believed this investigation began after the Brownlow medal in September, when, of course, Carlton's Patrick Cripps won in a thrilling final round count. And it's after that the AFL believes, or the AFL says rather, that one of its betting partners reached out to it and told them of this potential suspicious betting activity. Central to these allegations, Suzie, is that this umpire leaked votes from certain rounds of the home and away season. So he distributed that information to a bunch of people he knew. It's unknown at this stage how many rounds were leaked and the magnitude of the bets placed. But of course, the way the Brownlow works is that umpires get together after each game and they vote 3-2-1 on the best players they think played that game. It's important to note that the AFL and the police don't believe any match fixing or spot fixing has occurred, so the outcome of Patrick Cripps winning the Brownlow medal won't be impacted, because these only relate to certain rounds in certain games. But after search warrants were executed this morning, 4 arrests were made. Those 4 men have now been released. 3 of them, though, are expected to be charged on summons. So this probe is ongoing, Suzie, and it's also possible that the umpire involved could face disciplinary action from the AFL itself. Suzie.
Tom Maddox, thank you. Victoria's emergency services say the state's current flood crisis is far from over. A train was derailed in heavy rain. More than a dozen homes were damaged in floodwaters overnight, and 450 roads remain closed across the state.
16 carriages strewn across soaked tracks after a derailment near Geelong. This morning's downpour the likely cause of the accident at Inverleigh. Containers smashed, but fortunately nobody hurt.
We're incredibly lucky that we weren't dealing with a passenger train in this instance.
It's closed the rail corridor between Melbourne and Adelaide for at least a week, as authorities work out how to get heavy machinery in to move the wreckage. Some parts of the state received a month's worth of rain in just 4 hours last night, with many choosing to ignore warnings not to drive through floodwaters. Emergency crews received 650 calls for help. About half of them came from the Mornington Peninsula.
I drove out of my driveway and just saw the whole street flooded. Didn't realise how deep it was until I drove into it.
But others knew something was wrong as soon as they woke up.
First foot off the bed and it was in a puddle. It was just in the whole house, like the floorboards were up, the carpet was up. Everywhere I was stepping, it would just fill up with water.
A torrent raced through some houses.
I did think, God, I wish I had a kayak.
Causing some to evacuate.
Horrible gurgling noises, bubbling noises in my toilet, and then dirty water coming up through the sink in the ensuite.
In the already drenched border region, up to 95 gigalitres a day is being released from the Hume Dam into the bulging Murray River. Albury has experienced its biggest flood in 50 years.
It was absolutely devastating to see, the flooding, absolutely.
Catherine Pyle's music school was flooded after a blackout stopped storm pumps from working.
When you see a crisis, you've got to respond, or you've got to calm it down. Luckily, the SES were here. They are amazing humans.
The water levels peaked this afternoon in Albury, but the deluge is heading for communities downriver, putting them on alert for at least the next 2 weeks. Cheryl Hall, ABC News.
Further north in New South Wales, thousands of people have been rescued or evacuated as a flood emergency continues in the state's central west. Entire towns have been caught off guard, and some communities are preparing for their second, potentially record-breaking floods in 2 weeks. And a massive clean-up is underway in South Australia, where tens of thousands of people have been without power since Saturday after violent storms hit the state. Dozens of schools have been shut as residents and businesses begin assessing the damage. Isabel Damon reports.
The damage is done, now for the repairs. Ben Kosh's house wasn't badly affected, but the clean-up on his property will take weeks.
The house can be fairly easily repaired. We're sort of a bit worried about the amount of significant trees that are down.
Simon Bowers was in his lounge room when he heard several trees crack and splinter.
Almost an explosion when this huge conifer up here split into about 4 pieces. 2 of them now in my lounge room.
With power outages across the Adelaide Hills, the local library was taking in residents.
It's challenging for my work because I run my own business, but I'm here in the library. I'm super grateful to have the library.
SA Power Networks says it'll take days to fix the worst of the damage here in Upper Sturt after the storms flattened Stobie poles and ripped down wires. Interstate crews will arrive tomorrow to help. Almost 50 schools were closed, with some senior school exams cancelled. These Year 12 students, though, sat their exams in the dark.
We just had to have all the windows open to have as much light as possible in there.
It was hard to study, there's no power, so just studying by candlelight.
The wild weather took out major infrastructure, including the interconnector that links South Australia to the national energy market. Isabel Damon, ABC News.
For the first time in more than 5 years, the leaders of Australia and China will formally meet face-to-face. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has confirmed he'll hold talks tomorrow with Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the G20 Summit in Bali. World leaders have begun arriving on the island amid a major security operation. From Nusa Dua in Bali, here's Indonesia correspondent Ann Barker.
A tourist paradise transformed as world leaders prepare to share a stage. 18,000 troops and police are on high alert as Balinese fishing boats make way for Navy vessels. Anthony Albanese and other leaders plan to use the G20 talks to focus on a global energy and inflation crisis.
The G20 meeting comes at a critical time for the international community.
The Prime Minister will discuss shared economic challenges in a meeting with the summit's host, Joko Widodo.
I'm here to give support to President Widodo, and I look forward to a successful summit.
But his biggest priority will be another one-on-one meeting, now confirmed with China's president.
Tomorrow I will be having a bilateral meeting with Chinese President Xi. We enter this discussion with goodwill. There are no preconditions on this discussion. I'm looking forward to having constructive dialogue.
A once familiar face at G20 summits, Vladimir Putin is the only no-show. Russia's foreign minister sent in his place to face Western scorn over its war in Ukraine.
We have a very clear position, and it's a consistent position, that there is a need for Russia to withdraw from this aggressive action that is against international law.
Russia's invasion, along with regional tensions over Taiwan, will be high on the agenda when US President Joe Biden meets his Chinese counterpart this evening.
As important as this summit is globally, what happens on the sidelines is equally significant for Australia. The Prime Minister's first face-to-face meeting with China's leader in 5 years is another sign a once deep diplomatic rift with Beijing may be starting to heal. Ann Barker, ABC News, Bali.
And our Global Affairs editor, John Lyons, is also at the summit. He joins me now live from Bali. John, there's so much at stake at this G20. How is China being perceived by other countries?
Well, Suzie, for years we've heard about the rise of China. Well, this is what a risen China looks like. At the G20 in Bali, a confident China, Xi Jinping has just got his 3rd term, and now everybody wants to meet Xi Jinping. Joe Biden is having his meeting with him later today. Anthony Albanese, after months of making an effort, has managed to secure his meeting because so many of the world's issues somehow intersect with China. The US-Chinese tensions over Taiwan, of course, directly involve China. Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is one of the few leaders who has a relationship with Xi Jinping, and that may be one that can encourage Vladimir Putin to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. The world economy, interest rates, the supply chains around the world, all of those get back to China. And what Anthony Albanese is hoping tomorrow is that the $20 billion of sanctions that China has on Australian companies will be lifted.
John Lyons in Bali, thank you. Victorians have started to cast their votes in this month's state election, with early polls open from today. Energy again dominated the campaign trail, but there are questions about how both sides will deliver on their promises to slash bills. Here's state political reporter Bridget Rollison.
Sporting a new look, but using the same line.
This is all part of a positive and optimistic plan. Positive and optimistic plan, putting a positive and optimistic plan forward.
The Premier was talking up plans for more free TAFE.
It won't matter what your prior qualification was. If you want to enrol in one of our priority free TAFE courses, then you will be able to do that free.
I won't spill it, don't worry. There's too much pressure on me.
The Coalition was pushing its pledge to reserve all new gas for Victorian use.
We want to have a Victorian gas reserve.
But there are questions about how practical that would be.
You physically cannot reserve gas within a state because of something called the Commonwealth Constitution.
We want to keep Victorian gas, new Victorian gas, for this state.
We don't have Queensland bananas kept for Queenslanders, so it's hard to see how we can have Victorian gas kept for Victorians.
Some experts are also sceptical about Labor's promise to revive the government-owned State Electricity Commission.
It's very difficult to see what exactly its impact can be on energy prices until we know exactly what sort of things it's going to do.
Despite the latest polls showing the election race is getting closer, the Premier insists he won't be doing a deal with the Greens or any independents if Victoria finds itself with a hung parliament in 12 days.
Whether Labor has a majority in its own right does depend on a large number of contests which aren't traditional two-party preferred races.
Thousands of Victorians have already decided who should win that contest, with early voting opening today.
Just because I'm really angry, so it's great to vote early when you're angry with the government.
Just because I work usually and I want to have my weekend for myself.
Bridget Rollison, ABC News, Melbourne.
Victorian prosecutors have told a jury that a man accused of gunning down a grocer on a Melbourne toll road is allegedly associated with a motorcycle club. Aaron Ong denies he fatally shot Melbourne father Paul Vergona on Eastlink more than 3 years ago.
United in grief, Paul Vergona's family arrives at the Supreme Court to face his alleged killer. 37-year-old Aaron Ong is accused of being one of the men who gunned down the 46-year-old grocer. He's pleaded not guilty. In November 2019, Mr Vergona, who lived in Croydon, was on his way to work when he was shot 7 times as a stolen Mercedes pulled up next to him on the Eastlink toll road near Donvale. He died at the scene, still in the driver's seat, with the engine running, his mobile phone on his lap. Prosecutors today told the Supreme Court that Mr Ong and another man, Joshua Ryder, were inside the stolen car, but they still can't say who pulled the trigger. Either Mr Ong or Mr Ryder was driving while the other fired the gun. Both were working as a team, both were implementing a well-organised plan to shoot, to kill or to cause really serious injury. The jury was today told that Mr Vergona had no criminal links and no motive for the shooting has been aired in court, but it's heard both his alleged killers were associated with a motorcycle club in Port Melbourne. The stolen Mercedes was later found torched in Mooroolbark. Prosecutors alleged that the 2 accused men then fled in another stolen car, which they abandoned after they lost control of it in a high-speed police pursuit. Mr Ong's lawyers will make his case to the jury tomorrow. Danny Tran, ABC News, Melbourne.
Coming up on 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson, debate over protecting one of Australia's iconic native animals.
I don't think most of the public is aware of what is going on.
We call them wild dogs when they're inconvenient, and we call them dingoes when we want to put them on postcards.
We must act now before the population's hunted to extinction.
Turkish police have arrested a suspect who's believed to have planted the bomb that tore through a busy street in Istanbul. 6 people were killed and dozens injured. Turkey's president says it appears to have been an act of terrorism.
The moment of terror. Panic spreads as the peace of an Istanbul afternoon is shattered. There hasn't been a bomb in the capital in years. Families on a weekend outing shocked and terrified. The explosion tore through one of the city's most popular shopping streets at one of its busiest times. CCTV footage showed the street packed with people before the blast. Emergency services descended on the scene. More than 80 people were injured.
I urged people not to panic when they began to all run at once. Police arrived and told people to leave the scene slowly.
The bomb went off near Taksim Square, a large plaza in the heart of the capital surrounded by hotels. Tens of millions of tourists from around the world spent time on this iconic boulevard, full of restaurants and shops. Police have arrested a suspect. Authorities say a woman sat on a bench for 40 minutes and left moments before the blast.
It would be wrong to say this is undoubtedly a terrorist attack, but the initial intelligence from my governor is that it smells like terrorism.
This would be the first major terror attack in Istanbul in 5 years. No one has claimed responsibility. Kurdish separatists and Islamic militants have both carried out bombings in the city. Now people are worried they'll be targeted again. Alison Horn, ABC News.
A nightly curfew has been imposed in the liberated Ukrainian southern city of Kherson amid fears Russian troops will resume shelling the city. Residents are continuing to celebrate Russia's retreat following its 9-month occupation of the city. But the fleeing troops damaged critical infrastructure, so most homes are without power and water. In some cases, people are being forced to refill bottles in the Dnipro River, despite the danger of Russian guns on the eastern bank. Residents are also being warned about mines, tripwires and unexploded shells left behind. And an apology to our viewers last night when a technical issue resulted in an old news story about the Ukraine conflict going to air. King Charles has led Remembrance Day commemorations in London for the first time as monarch. His Majesty was joined by dignitaries and other members of the royal family to honour fallen servicemen and women. The King laid a newly designed wreath after a 2-minute silence at the Cenotaph War Memorial. The Queen Consort Camilla and Princess of Wales watched from the balcony. This year's service was also dedicated to Ukrainians fighting against Russia's invasion. An investigation by the ABC's Four Corners program has uncovered footage of youth detention officers using a potentially deadly restraint on a teenage boy. The practice is common in Western Australia, even though it poses a risk of suffocation. Grace Tobin has this report and a warning: it contains distressing material.
Stop resisting!
This is a young teenage boy screaming out for help as 5 youth detention officers hold him down.
Stop resisting and I'll ease it!
Moments before this, he'd hit a guard in the head with a mop. The officers restrained him using a practice known as folding up. He's pushed face down onto his cell bed as officers twist his arms behind his back. Another sits on his legs. He's told Four Corners he felt helpless.
Especially the hog tie. There's like 100-something pound man on your legs, and they're trying to say relax and it won't hurt. How you supposed to relax? You know, about 4 or 5 blokes on top of you.
A family member says she was devastated after watching footage of the boy being folded up.
He's screaming out. He's telling him he can't breathe. He can't breathe. And they're telling him to stop resisting. And I'm not saying that, you know, what he did is right, but that could have been handled a hell of a lot differently.
Restraint positions like folding up or hog tying carry the risk of suffocation and death. They're not used by any police force in Australia. The WA Corrective Services Minister Bill Johnston says he's never heard of the practice.
I'm the minister. I don't personally work in the custodial estate. I'm not a youth custodial officer.
In a statement, the Department of Justice said the restraint is only used as a last resort in the most extreme circumstances for as little time as possible. Grace Tobin, ABC News.
And if you or someone you know is experiencing distress, please contact Yarn on 13 Yarn or through their website. You can also get in touch with the Kids Helpline on 1800 55 1800 or via their website. Tonight's Four Corners will air at 8:30 p.m. on ABC One, or you can watch it on iView. New research shows racism in Australian workplaces is rife and not enough is being done to identify and address it. Experts are calling for reforms to better protect workers.
Jacqueline Stewart still feels traumatised by the racism she experienced when she was an employee of New South Wales Health.
Even if I am qualified, I'm finding that I'm struggling to get into employment now.
She lodged an internal complaint about colleagues drinking and one painting their face black at a work event.
I'd received a few phone calls from people who had seen that and asked me directly if that was blackface, and they found it very offensive to be up on a Health New South Wales Facebook page.
A spokesman for New South Wales Health said they take allegations of racism and bullying seriously and that the case was fully investigated and appropriate action was implemented for those involved. The cost of racism to the economy from mental health services and loss of income is estimated to be nearly $45 billion a year. A recent survey of public sector workers found 76% either witnessed discrimination and/or experienced discrimination. Experts are calling for government agencies to start collecting detailed data on diversity in workplaces in the same way they do with gender. They also want the law governing racism to be reformed.
People can come to the law and its ability to offer you remedy and redress is limited and difficult.
Jacqueline says she didn't feel safe to return to New South Wales Health.
So they wanted me to go back to work with no safety plan.
She worries that if complaints aren't properly addressed, the social and economic cost to the nation will soar. Nasim Khadem, ABC News.
To finance now, and the Australian dollar continued to rise today, touching 67 US cents this morning for the first time in 2 months. Here's Alan Kohler.
Exactly a month ago, on October the 14th, the Aussie dipped below 62 US cents for the first time since the first panic of the pandemic in 2020. Before that, well, it was 20 years since we'd seen that sort of exchange rate, but in the past month, it's rallied hard. And that rally was turbocharged on Thursday night, our time, by the lower than expected American inflation rate for October, which has caused a sharp fall in the US dollar since then. In turn, because maybe inflation has peaked and US interest rates won't go up as much. We'll see about that, but for the moment, the passengers have all rushed to the other side of the ferry. Tonight, the Australian dollar exchange rate is still in the high 66s, having touched 67 this morning. And the share market held on to Friday's big gain because resources stocks went up again, while banks and tech stocks reversed. And that's been the pattern all year. Year to date, mining stocks are up 5% and technology companies are down 30%. The strength of the mining stocks is due to rising commodity prices, largely caused by the war between two of the world's biggest commodity exporters. And commodities have had another strong session today because of the falling US dollar. Wall Street added a rise of nearly 1% to its massive 5% on Thursday. And finally, it's been a tough week for crypto punters after the collapse of one of their bookies, FTX. Here are the 7-day falls of a selection of cryptocurrencies, most of which you've never heard of. Bitcoin 24%, Ethereum 25%, Dogecoin 30%, Algorand 40%, and Solana down 61% in a week. Ouch. And that's finance.
England has well and truly stamped itself as the best white ball cricket team in the world after beating Pakistan in the T20 World Cup final. Led again by its talisman Ben Stokes, England withstood Pakistan's ferocious pace attack to win by 5 wickets in front of more than 80,000 fans at the MCG.
Embracing loved ones and teammates, England walked out of Melbourne the undisputed white ball champions of the world.
The dressing room was definitely buzzing last night, plenty of singing and dancing, and we celebrated accordingly.
This time, the 31-year-old stood tall when the pressure was at its highest point.
Representing your country, World Cups, it's amazing, but yeah, this has been a good one.
They're not out of it. This man, he loves the G. Off you go.
But it wasn't enough. England's
must-win games every point from then on. I think we played our best cricket and we've just got better and better.
Come on, England!
The result gave fans in Melbourne a reason to celebrate long into the night. In Pakistan, it was a different story. Fans there inconsolable despite a memorable tournament.
फाइनल हारते हैं तो आपको अफसोस होता ही है मेरे ख्याल से बिल्कुल हम 20 रन शॉर्ट थे जिसकी वजह से
England's celebrations can't drag on, though. The team has already flown to Adelaide, where they'll take on Australia in the first of 3 ODIs. Tom Maddox, ABC News, Melbourne.
Australia's bid to win the Billie Jean King Cup for the first time since 1974 has been ended by Switzerland in Glasgow. The world number 237, Storm Sanders, lost a tight 3-set match against the world number 35, Jill Teichmann. Ayla Tomjanovic lost 6-2, 6-1, beaten by world number 12, Belinda Bencic. It's the first time Switzerland has won the Cup and the second time in 3 years that Australia has lost the final.
We gave it everything, but a real credit to the Swiss team. I know they got to the final last year, they've gone one more this time, and they've just shown why they're world champions. I mean, pretty amazing tennis to finish it off by Belinda. It was just flawless.
British driver George Russell has finished ahead of his Mercedes teammate Lewis Hamilton to win the Formula One Grand Prix in Brazil. Australian Daniel Ricciardo made a disastrous start to the race, crashing out on the opening lap after a collision with Denmark's Kevin Magnussen. Ferrari driver Charles Leclerc spun off the track on lap 7 but still managed to finish 4th. It was the first Grand Prix victory for Russell, who crossed the line 1.5 seconds ahead of Hamilton. Now with the weather, here's Paul Higgins.
And Suzie, it's been an intense 24 hours for Victorians who spent the day mopping up and the SES dealing with those big storms overnight. 83 millimetres fell at Mount Hotham in the 24 hours to 9 a.m. Today, we had more showers, but none of those severe thunderstorms that brought the flash flooding overnight. Instead, more winter-like showers. 29 millimetres falling at Mount Sabine in the Otways. Meanwhile, Mallacoota basked in 25 degrees. Lines of thunderstorms pummeled Melbourne's southwest and the Mornington Peninsula after midnight, dumping 81 millimetres of rain on Rosebud, 63 at Mornington and around 55 on Werribee. And today, another 27 at Avalon, 15 at Hoppers Crossing and also in Sunshine. 9 millimetres in Melbourne City today, not much sunshine, a high of 17.4 at 11:07 a.m. In the soggy backyard, it is now 16 degrees. The cooler air that moved in today also impacted Hobart and Adelaide. Now, the trough that brought the overnight storms has moved away to the east. A cold front crossed Victoria today, and a blast of cold air is going to arrive tomorrow directly from the south. Just follow those isobars there. The high will be over us Thursday and Friday, bringing some settled weather, but then another burst of showers for Victoria over the weekend, but it won't be as stormy as it was last weekend. Tomorrow, wet in Hobart, up to 50 millimetres of rain. Morning sun in Sydney, then late showers. Cloudy in Adelaide. Back home, showers easing overnight, then redeveloping on and south of the ranges tomorrow. A shower or two over the northern plains in the afternoon. Small hail and thunder near the coast and snow down to 800 metres elevation during the day. Just 10 degrees for you in Ballarat. A sheep grazier's warning is current in these districts. Major flooding on the Kiewa River, parts of the Murray River and moderate on the rest of these rivers. A southwesterly wind on the bay, 15 to 30 knots. Strong winds on the bays and all coastal waters. Well, a few showers are showing up on the radar around Melbourne at the moment. You can see them there. We're in for a mostly dry Tuesday morning, but then a few showers in the afternoon and the evening, and it's going to be cold for this late in spring. 14 tomorrow, 9 overnight, and a fresh southwest wind. It'll still be with us Wednesday, along with a morning shower or two. Thursday, just a clearing shower. Sunny 23 Friday, and showers but warm on Saturday with a strong north wind. Suzie.
Thanks, Paul. That's the latest from ABC News. Sarah Ferguson is up next. Good night.
Welcome to 7:30. Australia's native animal